This program was made possible by Wings Over the Rockies, educating and inspiring all people about aviation and space endeavors of the past, present, and the future. Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we'll explore the challenges posed by wildfires and the role of aviation in fighting fires from the skies.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
Fire aviation teams are critical, complex efforts made up of pilots, technicians, coordinators, and ground crew who work together to put out and contain wildfires. In this episode, we'll speak with the pilots to learn what aviation firefighting is and how it works. Then, we'll explore the aircraft themselves to learn more about the modifications and the technical aspects that enable these planes and helicopters to operate in firefighting missions. And finally, we'll meet some of the many community members who were so drastically affected by the historic 2020 Colorado fire season. It's time to go behind the wings.
My name is Claire Waldock, and I'm a crew chief here at Co-Fire Aviation. Today is our first week of company training 2021, and we're out here in Fort Morgan, Colorado. So to get ready for the fire season, we've got our airplanes here, and we do our annuals, our 100 hours. We get our trucks and trailers ready, get those all fixed up. We just make sure that our equipment is in tip-top shape and ready for a full fire season. Co-Fire is a big family. You know, the fire aviation world, it can be a dangerous thing to do, so everybody comes together and makes sure everything is safe and done correctly, properly. Co-Fire has a support crew, and the drivers that drive the support vehicles is kind of like a mobile base. So we have the ability to mix retardant on our trailers and load it onto the airplanes. So essentially, if we get stationed for a fire where there's no resources, we're able to support from the ground and help out with that fire. So we've got everything available. We get there in the morning about 9 o'clock typically, and the pilots will do their walk around the airplane, and we are on duty from then on. We wait for a fire call, but when it's time to go, we're ready, and we've already done all our prep work. Our load is mixed, if that's the case, and we're loading off of that base, and then everybody, it's go time. Us as drivers, we can help those guys on the ground, because they're the real heroes. Our pilots can help those guys on the ground because they put themselves in a very dangerous situation to protect structures and homes and the forest. And it's really special to know that we can help a little bit by mixing that load and getting those pilots off the ground safely and getting them to the fire on time and back home to see their families. It's a really cool world to be a part of.
One of the things we're learning is that fire season is no longer a fire season. Fire season is a year-round thing, and we have fires burning at a rate that we've never seen before. To understand the scope of wildfires today, we need to understand how climate change and the environment impact fire systems. We're going to talk to Dr. Russ Schumacher, Colorado's state climatologist, to learn more.
My name is Russ Schumacher. I am the state climatologist for Colorado, and we are here on the official Fort Collins weather station. The weather station has been here at CSU since the late 1800s. Wildfires, it's always a complicated issue because there's so many factors involved. The health of the forest itself, whether people are living in that area that might be impacted. But certainly the weather and climate aspects play a big part in setting that up. The big fire years that we've had in Colorado since 2000 or so have tended to come in the hot, dry summers, the big drought years. The folks who kind of study wildfires, I think, are just seeing new things that haven't really been observed before. They focus on three things when it comes to weather. It's hot, dry, and windy. And we saw that on so many days in 2020 where it was hot and dry and windy, and the fuels had dried out from kind of a longer period of it being hot and dry. How the fires behave, the fires creating their own weather, having a big wildfire set within a day that's quite windy you know, that makes the fire take off on its own, but then within the fire itself, you see vortices, kind of like tornadoes within the fire. Since the turn of the 21st century, here in Colorado and many places in the West, we've seen this increase in acreage burned from wildfires, and that's what climate models and other analyses have been pointing to. We had these huge fires burning in a time period when that's never really happened before. The fires of 2020, it really was very eye-opening. The warming up and drying out of the forests that we've seen in the last 20 years or so, and then these big fires. Climate change is playing a role in that. It's not the only thing that causes that, but it sets up these conditions for this explosive kind of fire year that we saw last year.
Issues like wildfires need to be approached from every angle. Ground crews, aviation teams, and even lawmakers come together to invest in resources and infrastructure needed to face the new reality of wildfires today.
I'm Senator Bob Rankin. I represent 7 counties in northwest Colorado, and 4 of our major fires this year occurred in my district. So this is one of the most important subjects of our legislative session, to try to be prepared for the next fire season. We had been seeing increasing wildfires for a number of years, but this last fire season really made an impression on us, I think, largely because several of those fires just got out of control.
The 2020 wildfire season was the worst on record. More than 625,000 acres burned, more than 1,000 fires. It's not if, it's when. When will that next wildfire hit us? Every person in this state was impacted by the plumes of smoke, by the change in our air quality, and for those of us living in the mountains, that kind of day-to-day trepidation, you know, is another wildfire on the front for me and my home and in my neighborhood. We have to be thinking in the short term, midterm, and long term. So in the short term, what can I do to make sure this next summer is a safer one? How can we prepare the state, whether that be with mitigation efforts, you know, where can we reduce the hazardous fuels that are accumulating in our forests? What can we do to restore our watersheds that have been so heavily damaged by wildfire? And then how can I expand and strengthen our wildfire response? And if that is through technology and new tools in the toolkit, like aviation resources, or just training firefighters and making sure they are ready, boots on the ground, to get out there and tackle a fire, it doesn't mean we can ignore that mid and long-term challenge around climate change. So I hope that my colleagues and I will have the opportunity to make those investments in the right way, to ensure that Coloradans are taken care of and that we protect our great state.
Wildfires impact everybody, from mountain communities to wildland-urban interface, and even in cities. Wildfires are changing how we live.
My name is Shelley Olson, and I'm the Assistant Fire Chief at Grand Fire Protection District Number 1 here in Granby, Colorado. Every year we get more and more calls. Wildland fires have been on the rise. You know, most of the fires in Grand County that are put out, it's when you have those large ones that just escape your capabilities and your resources, and they just grow exponentially, and we call that a mega fire when it's over 100,000 acres, and we have never seen that in Grand County. Firefighting aircraft is a great tool. It can only be used in certain circumstances if everything is lined up. I mean, if the weather and the wind, it's not the end-all be-all. You can't just drop retardant and say the fire is out. Retardant just slows the fire down. Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, with the multi-mission aircraft, an invaluable tool for us to map the perimeter, to look for hot spots.
My name is Jeff Rasmussen. I'm a MSO with the Colorado Multi-Mission Aircraft. I have a background in wildland fire, multiple capacities. I worked on engine crews, hot shots, and smoke jumpers. and I've been here since March of 2019. The general role of firefighting aviation is to support firefighters on the ground and support their efforts. And so whether it be tankers or air attack or an intelligence gathering aircraft like we have here, it's all in support of the effort on the ground to suppress the wildfire. I've definitely witnessed an increase in scale and complexity of wildfires throughout my career, especially in 2020. That was kind of a off-the-charts year with fires like the East Troublesome Fire growing 100,000 acres in one day. That was unheard of when I started 12 years ago. So throughout my career, fires have definitely been gaining in complexity and size. And the complexity part typically comes from the wild-urban interface, where people are moving more into the mountains and into the woods, and that's creating a lot of complexity on these fires. When you're on the ground, intelligence and situational awareness is really everything, right? And so we're able to provide firefighters on the ground with a broader sense of what's going on around them that they would be aware of otherwise. Other firefighting aircraft do participate in suppression. Those are the tankers, the single-engine tankers and the large air tankers and helicopters. They deliver retardant and water on the fire, which suppresses the fire enough for those ground crews to get in there and work. Really all we need is a location and a way to get a hold of who's ever on the ground out there. We'll work with the pilot to determine if the weather is going to be workable in that area and what kind of the conditions are over there and getting there. And so it's a team effort in that sense. There's typically on any fire, there's multiple agencies and jurisdictions involved, and everyone's working towards the same goal.
So I'm Dave Bickerstaff. We're here at Centennial Airport in Centennial, Colorado, and I work for Bodie Aviation. Bodie has a contract with the state of Colorado to provide pilots and maintenance for the airplane behind me. Has a couple different names. This is a Pilatus PC-12. Here in Colorado, it's known as the multi-mission aircraft. So the job for me specifically as a pilot is to be here at the airport on shift for a 10-hour shift. And essentially, if the Division of Fire Prevention and Control gets a mission, then they'll come in, let me know, and I'm responsible for pre-flighting the airplane, building the flight plan, and then flying the crew where they need to go. So it's single pilot operations, do all the coordination, working with air traffic control. Get pretty good at changes on the fly, because almost every time we take off, the plan changes, and whatever we filed is not what we fly, and it's kind of fun working with Denver, and they're really fantastic. Shout out to the Denver Center controllers and everybody who's really patient and flexible working with us to get where we need to go. We could be just about anywhere in the state in an hour, and we have about 6.5 hours of loiter time, depending on how close our nearest airport is, that we can divert to. So the aerial firefighting ops is definitely a symphony in terms of how it's orchestrated and coordinated. It's pretty neat to see it from above, and there's been a couple of fires where we've watched, and there's a lead plane, there's the air attack pilot leading around a couple of large tankers, and then there's like a couple of seats zipping in and out, and some helicopters. So it's really neat to see how that is orchestrated. There's a lot of disparate groups that come together to make it happen from all over the country, even the world. But ultimately, everyone has the same focus, which is trying to protect lives and property, minimize the damage, and get the fires under control when they're not, if we can.
For firefighting teams, air resources are tools in the toolbox. From large air tankers to helicopters and single-engine planes, each aircraft has a unique capability. With high maneuverability, single-engine air tankers, or seats, are a class of aircraft that can zip in and out of firefighting incidents with precision, and when used properly, with great effectiveness.
So Co-Fire Aviation is single-engine air tankers based on the Air Tractor 802. And when Chris Doyle and I formed Co-Fire Aviation, we put a little different focus on how we were going to go about it, and that we wanted to put together the safest, best performing single-engine air tanker out there that we possibly could. Being that we were going to be based in Colorado and knew that we could be fighting fires, as high as 11,000, 12,000 feet, you need that performance to be able to get to the fire, to be able to maneuver on the fire, and efficiently get back to the airport for another load and back to the fire. Typically, we can point the nose at a fire and climb right up to wherever that fire's at and go to work, where in the past, seats have not had that kind of horsepower, and they maybe had to circle around, climbing up to altitude further out, taking more time to get to the fire to respond. There's a lot more fires than what they hear about, because they only hear about the big ones that make the news. And a lot of times we catch these fires small, we help the guys on the ground, and they're able to contain that, and it becomes a non-event. And so nobody ever really knows about it. But there's a lot more fires than what people know, and we catch a lot of them before they get big and get a big name. So it is fun and satisfying when you can go out and help those guys on the ground and save structures or contain a fire. It's also frustrating when you can't go because it's too windy, or you do go and what you do isn't effective enough and they still lose the fire or lose a structure. You get the full roller coaster of emotions throughout the season.
For firefighting teams and those affected directly by the fires, the impacts are drastic and the lessons are profound.
I'm Ernie Bjorkman. I've been a news journalist for probably 40 years.
Channel 2's 9 o'clock news. There was excitement in town. Before you call us.
Retired 2 years ago, came up to a beautiful place called Grand Lake, Colorado. Been coming up here since the 80s part-time, and I'd like to give back to the town. So I ran for office, I won, and so I'm now one of 7 town trustees. You got Grand Lake, which is Colorado's deepest and biggest natural lake. You have a lot of boating in the summer, you have a lot of paddle boarding, you have a lot of sports and water recreation. Then of course October came along and we kept watching the fire down by Kremlin, moving up to Granby, and then the night of October 21st it hit here.
The East Troublesome would start on October 14th. It was a fire that started in Kremlin, near Kremlin, you know, on the west side of our county, and really traveled miles and miles very, very quickly, you know, over 100,000 acres in one evening. No one on the incident management team had ever seen something like that and have it move that quickly. Things aligned and created this, you know, firestorm that we saw on October 21st. It had direct sunlight, temperatures were higher, the relative humidity was very low, the winds were very, very strong. You know, we ended up unfortunately losing 366 homes, but we saved a lot. So, you know, that's a big number. It could have been much worse.
We kept seeing smoke to the south of us, down by Granby, Kremlin. And then, you know, we kept saying, oh, that's a shame. You know, it's large billowing smoke. And so far, there wasn't any destruction. It was just mostly back in the woods. But we knew because of all the beetle kill up here that it was just a matter of time that thing was going to spread. This whole sky was kind of orange smoke. We knew that there was no stopping it. We heard that the fire department was starting a pre-evacuation on the west side of 34, which is the main highway that comes into Grand Lake. And we said, no big deal, you know, it's pre-evacuation. Well, little did we realize, and a lot of firefighters didn't realize, that first of all, we had 60-mile-an-hour winds. And then within the fire itself, it was creating a 200-mile-an-hour mini weather system itself. So that thing spread about 16, 17 miles in a matter of hours. And so by 7 o'clock that night, my wife and I are sitting watching TV, having a glass of wine, and suddenly we hear there's a mandatory evacuation. Luckily, we had gotten some things together, some important papers, because we said, you know what, you never know. The lights started flickering in our house, and the firefighters were coming by with bullhorns saying, get out immediately. So we had basically 10 minutes to get out. We live on one end of Main Street, so driving out, it was like a thick fog of smoke. Maybe 5 feet in front of you is all you could see. Burning embers all around us. And I kept looking at all these old buildings and I said, oh my God, this whole town is gonna go up. But the nice relief was firefighters from numerous agencies had lined this street. They were like soldiers ready to take on the enemy. When we left town, I said, we don't know if we're going to come back to a town or not. If it wasn't for those firefighters, this place would have burned, because any of those embers could have hit one of these wooden porches and put the whole town on fire. I firmly believe that the aerial firefighters really stopped the spread until they couldn't fly anymore on that day, and that's the day that really affected us and had to evacuate out of town.
I know at my house, I ended up losing a house in Grand Lake, and at 3,000 some degrees, everything just turns to dust, and that's really what happened. It was so incredibly hot. Grand County has never had to go through something like this.
With fire seasons intensifying each year, new approaches are advancing firefighting teams' abilities to fight fires. One of these methods used is infrared camera technology to map, track, and even predict what a fire will do next. Now, we'll hear from Camille Calabeo to learn exactly how.
How do infrared cameras work? We use infrared cameras to detect and fight fires, but how do they work and why infrared? First, let's talk about what infrared actually is. We can't see infrared with our own eyes, but we can see it with special infrared cameras that we use for a variety of things, including detecting and fighting fires. Instead of taking a visual image of an object or area of interest, infrared cameras take a thermal image by measuring the temperature of each pixel in the image. We can then apply a color scheme to these temperature readings to visualize hotter and colder parts of the image. We use infrared cameras for firefighting in many ways. We can monitor rising temperature spots to detect where a fire might start before it ignites. We can also take temperature readings of a fire that is already burning to help firefighters make informed decisions about where to target their firefighting activities. Infrared cameras have changed the way we detect and fight fires because they allow us to monitor the fire even with a thick smoke cover that limits our ability to see the flames with our own eyes. Infrared cameras are placed on board firefighting planes and helicopters, but they are also used on satellites to provide even more data to firefighters and local officials.
From satellite cameras to Colorado's own Pilatus PC-12 multi-mission aircraft, infrared technology is empowering ground crews from the sky like never before.
My name is Andrea Drinkhouse, and I'm one of the MSOs that we have here, which is the mission sensor operators that ride in the back of the plane and do the fire mapping or tactical infrared or anything they needed from us back there. So we use the camera, move the camera around to see what's below the plane. When there's tons of smoke, especially it seems like this last year, it happened more than it did the previous year, probably because the fires were so much bigger this last year. But with all of that smoke, normally you would have like air attack platform flying around, or you'd have helicopters flying around, and they could give ground crews situational awareness about what's happening. But with all that smoke, they couldn't see anything and they were all grounded. But we were still able to be up flying through the smoke and the clouds, and we were usually above the smoke, but we could look down with our infrared camera and we could scan around and we could see where all the fire was. We could see where the heat or spots were with the infrared. It was a hotshot crew member who was our ground contact. We told him it's right along, this berm area. We think we see like a dozer right here on this edge part, so lat long plus just a description of where it was. So he takes off on his quad, goes over to wherever it is. We continue on our flight path because we're still, again, looping up and down to any other spots we find. And he called back on the radio and he was like, yeah, I found the spot. It's 1 inch by 3 inches in a dozer berm. I don't know how he found that. At one point we were just writing down like a list of lat longs, and like every time we hit like 3 or 4, we would call down to our ground contact. Goal of the program is to do detection where we're flying, and we try to find fires when they're really small.
When I was on the ground as an engine boss and running an engine crew, this data wasn't even present. I mean, this wasn't something that we had access to. It was definitely not real-time data or near real-time data, and that's probably the biggest leap we've made with this platform, is that it is near real-time data. The biggest thing is just the increasing need for more bandwidth for data connectivity. As a ground crew member at some point in time, I'm going to be able to just pick up my iPhone or my Android device or whatever I'm using for a smartphone and just hit a couple buttons on an app and instantly have that data in real time. The air resources, they are expensive, but you have to weigh the cost of that expensive resource with the overall cost of fighting a very large fire that gets completely out of hand.
Large scale, we really need to do more. We are definitely still in recovery mode, which is a tricky place to be when you're looking at the next season of fire. And having gone through it now, even more so important, because yes, it can happen to us.
Wildfires continue to grow in frequency, intensity, and complexity. And at the same time, new applications of aviation resources, investments in infrastructure, and innovations in technology are providing aviation firefighting teams with new ways to approach these major challenges. Wildfires are not going away anytime soon, and in part 2, we'll explore how these new technologies may shape the future of aviation firefighting. This program was made possible by Wings Over the Rockies, educating and inspiring all people about aviation and space endeavors of the past, present, and the future. Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we'll take a look at the innovations in aviation firefighting.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
Wildfires have been increasing in frequency, intensity, and complexity all across the western United States and around the world. When the fire does new things, firefighting teams have to do new things too.
Anyone can start a fire and never even know it.
CAL FIRE in California is one of the largest fire agencies in the world, with more than 60 aircraft and growing.
But every year we start forest fires.
Black Hawk helicopters are converted into Firehawks. Critical data is streamed live between aerial and ground crews, and night vision goggles allow pilots to fight fires from the sky at night. It's time to go behind the wings. While 2020 was unprecedented, wildfires have been intensifying for years. California aviation firefighters provide one of the best examples of how aviation programs can develop in response to the increasing fires.
My name is Stu Sprung, and I'm the Chief of Flight Operations for CAL FIRE. So this is the CAL FIRE aviation program. We are the largest aerial firefighting fleet in the world. We provide aerial fire protection for the state of California and the 40 million citizens that are in it. Right now we're at about 60 aircraft that we staff throughout 22 bases throughout the state. And the mandate for those aircraft is to quickly respond. We respond them like we respond fire engines out of fire stations. Within 5 minutes, we try to get in them and out the door. We respond to those fires in our responsibility area within 20 minutes and keep 95% of them under 10 acres. Fire seasons used to be about 4 months, and that was accepted for many, many years in the fire service. And in the past several years, it's become more of a year-round experience for us. Our fleet certainly has expanded because of those increased needs. Anyone flying in an airline over the state can look down in the forest and see big swaths of dead trees. And really those just turn into kindling that just, if there's a fire, it happens to be something nearby, they just go up instantly. So we have a lot of forests, we have a lot of trees, but we also have people that reside in those areas, right, and have homes and whatnot. All we can really do is saying, okay, the threat has changed. We have to grow with it and adapt to it. We're making the biggest jumps we can with the available equipment.
My name is Chief Benjamin Berman. I am the helicopter program manager for CAL FIRE. There's definitely a demand signal for an aviation fleet of this size and expanding. About ready to onboard 7 brand new C-130s. We have 12 CAL FIRE Hawks, S-70i CAL FIRE Hawks. I think we've gone through unprecedented change in the last, I would say, 24 to 36 months on the rotary wing side. going from a Type 2, we call it, which is the Huey, to a Type 1, which is the Firehawk. Multi-engine, multi-system, lots of redundancy, twice as heavy, twice as large helicopter. We're definitely seeing more of a challenge, but I know that CAL FIRE and our interagency partners, we're definitely stepping up to that challenge. 95% at 10 acres, those don't typically make the headlines, and that's something that is being done in the background.
With our aircraft in coordination with the ground crews, we get it done. It's that 5% that we can't catch, that's too big for us. That's when we rely heavily on contract aircraft. We have hundreds of operators and hundreds of helicopters and airplanes that we have available to bring in and help us with that. There's never enough resources, there's never enough data, there's never enough people to mitigate these where we'd like to. Obviously, we wouldn't have the season like we did last year where we burned 4 million acres, where the worst season before that was 2 million, right? So in 1 year, we doubled what our worst season was before. Our program's about 50 years old, and each of those years has provided us with education of how to improve our program the next, and continues to.
Events today are much more complex than they ever used to be. Decisions that we used to have hours or even days to make sometimes are now having to be made in minutes. The better information they have, the better decisions they're able to make faster. We take data from different areas and different types of sources and information and pipe it into a super simple firefighter-friendly tool. It is entirely common now, especially with the size and scope of many of the wildfires that we have in the western United States, for any given one of them to have crews coming from dozens of states in the United States and internationally. And to be able to make it simple for those crews to see things is really the heart and soul of what we try to do at Intera. Started doing things with technology and imaging and being able to see things, fire perimeters and hyperspectral imaging, things we'd never been able to do before, and provide intelligence to the fire service that we'd never really had. The big joke that most of them will tell you is that there's 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. I mean, we literally used to take an airplane up with a video camera and take a picture of the fire, and then you'd have to land and go take that videotape in and do something with it, and then those pictures, physical pictures, would end up back at the incident command tent 10, 12, sometimes 24 hours later. But the fire's no longer there, and so the intelligence wasn't as good as it could have been. We take that data in real time, take it right off the aircraft as it's flying, and put it in the hands of the firefighters on the ground. It's one thing to have data in a spreadsheet. It's another thing to be able to understand what the data on the spreadsheet is telling you. So that's really what our engineers and our GIS people are really good at doing.
My name is Tom Eldar. I'm a software engineer at Intera. We take data and we present it in a much more user-friendly way. So what happens whenever a plane takes off to go to fight fires, take pictures, things like that? The moment it takes off, we get notice of it. We have a mission created on our end, and if they have a live video feed, they're able to open up the mission and see, oh hey, here's the live feed from that aircraft.
The firefighting industry has really glommed on to the technological advancements that have happened in this field. With a modernizing field, a lot of different technologies come into play. And as soon as you get all those different technologies working together, information turns into intelligence. If a fire chief shows up to a 1,000-acre fire, draws a polygon, and he can immediately notify the entire crew on the ground where the fire is at this point in time. When we put data on the map, we have to tell a story. And the story has to help the firefighters make the decisions on the ground that keep their community safe.
We have come leaps and bounds in just the last few years of being able to get information in near real time or real time into the hands of people who have to make decisions. And the reality is that we can do things today that we couldn't do even just a few years ago.
The firefighting industry is changing every day. New technologies provide new opportunities to both air and ground crews. Critically, fires don't stop burning at night. Agencies around the country are experimenting with night vision technology to enable them to fly at night. In Colorado, Co-Fire Aviation is leading the way with fixed-wing night vision firefighting.
Currently, there's really very little firefighting activity when the sun goes down. Now, sun goes down, we come home, get up the next morning, the sun comes up, we fight the fire. The fire doesn't quit at night. Now, we don't have to quit at night because of the night vision goggle technology. I first personally started flying with MVGs in 1982 in the Army in helicopters. And now it has kind of progressed into the fixed wing world with crop dusting, for example. The technology is there, it's been there, and it continues to refine. So we've got this highly technical apparatus here. This is just a standard light fixture, and we got a 7.5 watt bulb in here. So we make a little aperture, and what this does is simulate moonlight conditions. I'll show you the helmet setup and what we do. So the helmet has a power source. I can either power this side or this side, so that gives me redundancy. Essentially self-contained on the helmet. So the night vision goggle technology, you know, it goes back several years. So we're leveraging the equipment. We're also leveraging the experience that we have, and now we're putting that into the ability to fight fires at night. Well, in the evening and the nighttime, you have less humidity. You actually have probably better aircraft performance because it's cooler generally, and you have less wind. We could take advantage of those situations by flying at night, you know, having continuous coverage on the fire. We're on the 4th year of actually starting to do this. So we initiated in 2017, it was actually with the Oregon Department of Forestry. We would like to look into this. We know the technology's out there. We'd like to look into this. Would you be interested, Co-Fire? And Co-Fire said, yeah. We modified one of the airplanes because the cockpit needs to be modified to MVG compatibility. And so that's where we started in 2017, taking a look, putting a pilot in the airplane, flying it around. Can we do this? Can we safely drop retardant at night? Yes. Can we do it effectively? Yes. We are the first that is applying night vision goggle technology in fixed wing operations in night aerial firefighting, specifically the single engine air tankers. Now I'm looking through the goggles, but you can see I'm looking underneath. So the design of them, I'm looking underneath at the instrument panel, but outside I'm looking through the goggles. And it's very important for the cockpit to be what we call MVG compatible. So they're not having an influence on the goggles. That's why you see a lot there in the green light, because that is a spectrum of light that don't affect the goggles. And so they magnify the light.
For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Zachary Sullivan. I work for Co-Fire. I'm one of the pilots. I'm not one of the night vision pilots, so that's why I'm out here on the ground. So we run nine airplanes. One in Oregon's the only fixed wing aircraft out there on a night contract. We did it last year, and they're going to stand it up again this year. That kind of is the brainchild behind it. Basically what we wanted to do is invite everyone out, see what we're doing with it. First thing is I'd love any of your guys' feedback, like, Sullivan, this just don't work. Or Sullivan, this, clean this up, or this is a good idea. So we know how to improve our program. And hopefully someday we'll start to see this technology put to use throughout either this state or neighboring states. We think it's coming, so we just want to make sure we have the best way of doing it out there. So the first airplane's taken off at 8:40, so that gives us about 20 minutes to get out there. The first drop will probably be coming at 8:50. So we'll have a little bit of daylight, and then the rest will all be at dark. It's a brand new concept. Literally, the first place it's ever been done is in California with a couple of county agency helicopters. And that's been going on for about 3 years consistently. We stood up the airplane in Oregon last year for the first time, and we're the first fixed wing operator to ever do that. So it's brand new technology being implemented, and these things take time. It's we've taken the philosophy of a crawl, walk, run type of thing, and it just, implementation, you want to make sure it's done the right way. It's different because our target altitude is 60 to 80 feet from the fuel source. So again, that's not like a 747 that's flying at 30,000 feet. It's a little bit closer. So. There's always limitations. We can't just go out and fly through every amount of smoke in every situation, but it does give us, again, another advantage that we don't always have during the daytime. Another misconception is, wow, can you see power lines, cell towers, all these things out there that could cause an accident? You can see them better at night than you can during the day. It just, everything is so much better to see at night. So you've got a home, the fire's coming towards it. It's 8:52 p.m., which we have to be on the ground. With this technology, we can go a couple hours past that and go out and we can paint those houses. So maybe that will help save those houses where otherwise we can't fly. There's no chance, right? You know, we're seeing things that we've never seen before. Well, that's why we brought this out. Is it's time, you know, if the fire's gonna do things we are not used to, it's time to bring in ways to attack that fire that we're not used to, and this is one of those things.
While Co-Fire is leading the way with fixed-wing night vision goggle firefighting, helicopters are also an incredibly versatile tool in the aviation firefighting toolkit. Based on the famous Sikorsky Blackhawk, the Firehawk helicopter is modified to be one of the most capable firefighting aircraft available today.
My name is Eric Lama. I'm the Firehawk program manager here at United Rotorcraft. I'm in charge of all the current and future ongoing Firehawk programs that we have here at the facility. The Firehawk is, a multi-mission helicopter, right? It has the capability of dropping and inserting firefighters, either at the front line or even at a fire break where they're dropping people off to go through and actually start to prepare the fire break. So what the Firehawk will do for the most part is they will transport the firemen and all their equipment out, drop them off, and then the aircraft will lift off and then go out and actually start taking on water, and then coming back and then work in conjunction with the firefighters on the ground, either to suppress the fire that's there or support them just in case something were to pop up where the firefighters needed to be removed from the area quickly.
Just watching what our customers are able to do with this. We have San Diego Fire, LA County Fire, who really helped drive the design of this. Now Cal Fire, Colorado. I mean, we're just really excited to see this platform entering into the market and doing what it's doing. LA County realized that the Huey just could not keep up pace with the increasing fires, with the fire intensity, but the technology just has advanced so much from the 1950s. And it was during those early designs, we're sketching, designs on the back of on a napkin, and Denton says, my son's got this monster truck. And if we took that design of the monster truck and we, jacked up the struts like that, we could do the same with the Blackhawk. That napkin and that monster truck idea is what drove the design of the Firehawk.
The aircraft has a 1,000-gallon water tank on it. And what that 1,000-gallon water tank brings is it allows the pilot or the crew to actually meter that water out of the tank itself. It can take on a minimum of 200 all the way up to the 1,000 gallons, and then actually use that and spread that out to help spread, a fire line. So this is the 1,000-gallon water tank. This is obviously mounted under the belly of the aircraft. This is the snorkel, 10-foot extendable and retractable snorkel here. The steps on the right-hand side of the aircraft for the crew to get in and out of the airframe. I can't think of a better testament than giving the Blackhawk to a group of 18, 19, 21-year-olds that are in the military and allowing them to basically go out and just use that aircraft and abuse that aircraft, and it comes back every day wanting more. It's on the ramp, it's ready to go the next morning. It's able to withstand a multitude of, I don't want to say abuse, but tough wear. Some of the other operators have commercial aircraft. They're not built as robust as what the Blackhawk is. That's what gives this Firehawk the capability to be able to go out there and land in rugged areas and to be able to do the mission that it does today. So, we have a multitude of different customers' aircraft in the hangar, and they do customize some of the different things, right? Different radios, different things, different equipment that they use specifically in their counties or their fire departments to help them communicate with their, their individual bases or the local police departments there. But the main thing for the Firehawk is obviously the high gear, right? We take the main landing gear off of the aircraft. We jack the aircraft up. We basically put a 20-inch extension there with the torque box, allowing the aircraft to be jacked up to be able to handle that 1,000-gallon water tank. And what the tank has is it has a 10-foot snorkel that's extended and retracted from the cockpit to allow them to fill that tank. The pump will actually suck 1,000 gallons of water into that tank in under a minute. They get the water as close as they can to those fires so that they don't have to make a bunch of trips back and forth. The tank itself has a 45-gallon foam tank mounted to the back of it that's also controlled via the cockpit, allowing the pilots to inject firefighting foam coming from Sikorsky. It has the stroke attenuating seats for the crew to allow for crash impacts, so that the seats will absorb the impact. We've gotten it down to a point where we can paint that aircraft and have it completely modified in 8 months. The longer they sit here, they're not out fighting fires. They're not dropping firefighters into the hills. They're not out dropping water.
50% of all fires can be eliminated if they're put out within the first 20 to 30 minutes before they have a chance to grow into this big fire. And if you talk to LA County, they're going to say the Blackhawk, basically, that is the only aircraft that give you that performance capability and allow you to fly in areas that no other helicopters can.
Helicopters like the Firehawk are undoubtedly valuable tools for aviation firefighting teams. But how do helicopters fly? Next, we'll hear from Camille Calabello to find out exactly how helicopters take to the skies.
How do helicopters fly? Helicopters are very versatile aircraft. They can take off and land vertically, and they can hover, making them ideal for a variety of missions, including firefighting and search and rescue. But how do they work? Helicopters stay in the air thanks to their rotor blades, which work similarly to airplane wings. Both forms of aircraft generate lift when large amounts of air move over the wings or rotor blades very fast. When airplanes fly through the air travels around the wing to produce lift. When helicopters fly, the air travels around the quickly spinning rotor blades to produce lift. When rotor blades are spinning very fast, the body of the helicopter wants to spin in the opposite direction because of Newton's third law. To counteract this, most helicopters use another set of blades mounted sideways on the tail called a tail rotor. The tail rotor pushes the tail in the opposite direction of the torque induced by the main rotor, so the helicopter can fly in a straight line or maintain a stable hover. Lastly, helicopters control their movement by changing the angle and/or speed of the rotors. Helicopters' ability to navigate at slow speeds and even hover make them a critical piece of the aviation firefighting toolkit.
Wow, the technology used in aviation firefighting is super impressive, but it does come with a cost. As states and agencies consider greater investments in aviation firefighting, it's important to look at both the costs and the benefits.
The cost that's associated with, for instance, DFPC's Firehawk, the S70i that they're going to buy. You look at the initial cost, once it's all said and done outfitted, they're paying $24 million plus just to get that aircraft out the door, equipped and ready to go. Then you start looking at maintenance. Are they hiring within, or are they going to do, you look at CAL FIRE, they hired within. But it's a multi-billion-dollar operation a year for maintenance. You're looking at a rotor aircraft, you have 1 million plus parts that are trying to get away from itself. Helicopters are probably the most maintenance intensive part of what we do firefighting versus our fixed wing.
As we go through that life cycle of an aircraft acquisition, there's definitely lessons that we learn almost on a daily basis. We're utilizing infrared, we're utilizing real-time mapping, we're utilizing a lot of these different technologies to help us with a better understanding of what tools to employ.
We have an acronym that we talk about C. It's got to be safe, effective, and efficient. And this aircraft fits all those requirements. It's safe because it's got 2 engines. It's effective if we use it right, it's the right tool, and we're learning that. We take all that information, we mold it to our model that CAL FIRE uses, what other states might use from Washington to Arizona or Colorado. I'm sure they'll be looking at us, watching us, what we do, and they'll go, oh, that's probably a model that we may set up for them to follow in our footsteps.
At the end of the day, right, we had to make our own evaluation and look at what was going on out there. Everyone was like, These are game changers. They make a huge difference, and put out just one and suddenly the Firehawk is well worth every penny. Colorado's in a place. Now is the moment. We need to make these investments so that we are ready and we can protect Colorado's future.
Really excited about the progress Colorado is going to make thanks to the bill we'll be signing today and our legislators who are here today in being able to fight forest fires and hit them hard early.
You know, we had the conversation, is it worth the $24 million investment to bring a Firehawk to this state? And I think we were convinced by the evidence we see in California. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the next few years we're purchasing another Firehawk, because we see such a dramatic improvement in our ability to respond early to wildfires.
Obviously from the fire season that we had last year, that brought a lot of attention to the Firehawk and to, other firefighting apparatus capabilities within the state. And I mean, we had 2 of the largest forest fires in Colorado history last year. Had it not been as bad as it was that last year, it may not have gone through as quickly. It shows, that the legislators of Colorado are dedicated to its citizens. The future is kind of unlimited, right? I mean, it's kind of the old saying, right? If you can dream it, it can be done.
Reducing CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions is something that needs to happen. There is hope. This is not inevitable. When you can literally see, some of the effect in the sky, it has an impact. But I think a lot of us are also in this field are hopeful, because we know that it is possible to change this trajectory.
Lightning is still going to strike in unknown places. But I think the effectiveness of what we're learning here and what we're doing can be measured. So I hope 5 years from now we have some data that says, look what we've done. Look how many lives we've saved. Look how many structures we've saved. Look how many fires we got put out in the first 24 hours, let's say, before they spread.
Firefighting is not going away. But how we do it, and how effectively we do it, and how safely we're able to do it, is going to continue to change.
Wildfires won't stop burning, and aviation teams are pushing forward with new techniques to face the challenge. Today's aircraft are capable of delivering heavier loads at faster speeds with even more informed strategy. All of these tools will play a role in the next chapter of aviation firefighting. Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we'll get an inside look at the Century Series fighters.
3 Century Series strike aircraft.
You ever flown an airplane, Lieutenant?
No, sir.
The Century Series defined an era of aviation during the Cold War, charting a course from one era to another.
First of the supersonic fighters.
Jets were in their infancy, and many milestones, including the sound barrier, loomed large.
Welcome to supersonic pilot training. Morning, sir.
In an arms race with the Soviet Union, a rising superpower, the U.S. got to work developing a variety of impressive fighter jets known as the Century Series. It's time to go behind the wings.
I'm Chuck Stout. I'm the curator at Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum. As soon as we started developing jet fighters, we knew that we wanted to build something that would go faster than the speed of sound. So the sound barrier was first broken by Chuck Yeager in 1947. Manufacturers started trying to figure out immediately how they could build a supersonic production airplane, an airplane capable of exceeding the speed of sound in level flight. We recognized that the Soviet Union would be a major threat to democracy. We had nuclear weapons and they didn't until 1949. So as soon as they started exploding nuclear weapons, then it became the Cold War. In the late 40s, early 1950s, we realized that the biggest threat now would be Soviet bombers coming over the pole carrying nuclear weapons. So the first efforts towards building supersonic fighters and interceptors were to take out nuclear bombers coming from the Soviet Union. Because of the Air Force numbering sequence of their fighter planes, the first supersonic fighter happened to be the F-100, hence the beginning of the Century series.
The Big Punch of the Tactical Air Command is made up of these 3 Century series strike aircraft. All can deliver nuclear or non-nuclear weapons. The North American F-100 Super Sabre, first U.S. Air Force fighter to fly operationally at supersonic speed in straight and level flight.
My name's John Stewart. I joined the Air Force in 1966, and I went to F-100 training school at Luke Air Force Base. Graduated from that and went directly to Vietnam in October of 1968. I had gone to high school overseas at Wheelus Air Force Base, and so I'd seen an F-100 when I was in high school. When we'd go to lunch, they'd be at the officers club, and you'd see the pilots hanging around, and you thought, this is really something. And then 8 years later, I was flying one. The first time I flew the F-100 was quite a thrill. The first time I soloed and got in an airplane with only one seat, no one in the airplane, and lowered the canopy, and I said, here I am flying what at the time was one of the most iconic fighters in the Air Force. The people that flew the F-100s were hardcore fighter pilots. They lived on the edge. It just had an image of a big, bad machine. You had to be completely in charge of the airplane to fly it and survive. And so you looked at these people as almost demigods of aviation. Almost the first day in F-100 training, they showed us a video of one of them, the early models that did what they call a saber dance, and it ended up crashing. It was at Edwards Air Force Base. And they talked about the challenges of flying this airplane and the characteristics of this airplane when it gets slow, and the fact they drilled into our head that you must understand how to fly it, or you'll be one of those people that does a saber dance and you won't live through it. The flying of it, it was very heavy, 38,000 pounds maximum weight. It had low performance unless you had the afterburner, and the afterburner gave 60% more power.
Okay, got the burner, that's a good line.
It was a very responsive airplane once you got up to about 300 miles an hour. Before that, it was a little sluggish at slower airspeeds. The F-100 had a worldwide reputation as the first fighter aircraft that would go supersonic in level flight.
Unveiled in 1953 was the first of the supersonic fighters. Fighters capable of operating regularly above the speed of sound.
Prior to that, all the supersonic flight had occurred in taking the airplane up to 40 or 50,000 feet and going in a steep dive and going supersonic. During training, we'd go out and accelerate it, go through Mach 1. And then when you got back, Northrop gave you a pin. And so that was cool. The airplane, when you went Mach 1, you hardly knew it. There'd be a little change in the feeling of the flight controls, because when you go supersonic, the pressure on the airplane changes dramatically. You said, well, here I went supersonic in the first airplane that went supersonic in level flight. You felt like you were in a special group of aviators. Like the space race, we were in a race in the nation, and the people that were developing airplanes were trying to improve the airplane's performance.
Now from experimental labs and drawing boards, there came yet another aviation miracle. The jet.
Before that, in World War II, except for a few German jets, there were just prop planes. And so the transition from propeller planes to jet airplanes was just taking place when the F-100 came in.
After many years of study and research, jet-powered aircraft was a reality. More powerful than any plane previously conceived, the jet opened up a new vista in aviation progress.
and the shape of the fuselage was part of the technology. And a lot of it was experimental. They didn't really know what was going to happen until they got the airplane and tested it. The F-100 started the series, and each one they were trying to go faster and faster and faster and have more combat capability as they went through the Century series.
Okay, we get it. These fighter jets are super fast, but how exactly do sonic booms work? Next, we'll hear from Camille Calabeo to learn a little more about sonic booms.
The Century Series fighters were some of the first planes to reach supersonic speeds. But how do sonic booms work? Imagine you are walking down a crowded sidewalk. You are walking at a decent pace, faster than the other people, but they have time to react and move out of the way for you. This analogy applies to subsonic flight. You are the plane, and the people around you are the air molecules the plane is trying to move through. The air molecules have time to react to the plane coming and can move out of the way for it. Now imagine that you are in a big rush. This time you are moving much faster than the other people, and they don't have time to react and move out of the way for you. This analogy applies to supersonic flight. Again, you are the plane, and the people around you are the air molecules the plane is trying to move through. The plane is moving much faster than the air molecules can react, which means they don't have time to move out of the way. The supersonic plane in this instance causes a shock wave because the air molecules have compressed and built up a lot of pressure, just like you would compress the people in the crowd if you were running and pushing through it. Shock waves look similar to wakes created by boats, except that they are three-dimensional cones that extend all the way to the ground from the front of the plane. On the ground, a sharp release of pressure occurs and creates what is called a sonic boom that you would hear whenever the plane passes over you.
Development was very fast and progress was going at an astonishing rate. At the same time that North American was developing the F-100, McDonnell was developing the F-101, and Lockheed was developing the F-104, Convair was developing the F-102.
The year 1957 was an increasingly active one for the F-102 flight test program.
The F-102 was intended to be supersonic, but during its initial test flights, it was subsonic. That was very disappointing because they did everything right. They did everything according to the rule book.
The first jets were tubes with the intake in the front and the exhaust in the back, and you would attach wings and fuel tanks to it and a cockpit, and away you would go. When we started getting to the point of pushing the Mach, going Mach 0.9, 0.95, 0.97, you'd run into a wall. Drag profile would go way up and the thrust profile wouldn't change. That was what was called, for many, many years, the sound barrier.
Now, at the speed of sound, it forms a dangerous wall of shock waves known as the sound barrier.
It was not a barrier at all. It was an aerodynamic problem.
Meanwhile, in another part of the country, NASA had scientists working on aerodynamics. One of them, Richard Whitcomb, had been studying the area rule for years.
When you start approaching the Mach, you would get huge drag rise over those wings. This guy found out that you really needed to have the profile that looks like this, including the wings. So to do that, they took a big piece out of the fuselage called the Coke bottle effect. And that would give a total profile going through the air of a fairly sleek design.
When you look at the old-fashioned glass Coca-Cola bottles, they start out narrow, they get fat, then they get narrow again, and then they get fat again. And if you look at supersonic airplanes, there's always a narrow part where the wings stick out from the fuselage. And usually the tail gets a little bit wider behind that. So that's the Coke bottle that everybody talks about.
The F-102 wouldn't even come close to going through the muck. They changed it. They put some big doofers on the outside of the engine in the rear. They changed the intake design, which was up front. And then they took a big chop out of the fuselage to give it an area rule. Then they found out the thing went supersonic just fine with the same engine.
The Century Series exemplified an era of rapid development, fueled by the military tensions and resulting demands of the Cold War. The U.S. government approached manufacturers, simultaneously producing a variety of aircraft, each with their own unique characteristics and capabilities. Next, we'll take a look at the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, a single-engine supersonic interceptor aircraft that was used extensively during the Cold War and eventually saw widespread manufacturing and use outside of the U.S.
When I got into the Air Force, I decided I had to be a fighter pilot. That's how I got into F-104s. It was on the heels of the Cuban crisis in early 1963.
The F-104 is a tower in the sky from which men can keep vigil over their homeland.
The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter was designed under the same design team under Kelly Johnson, who was also responsible for the P-38 Lightning in World War II and for the F-80 Shooting Star, which was our first operational jet fighter. So when he approached this point defense interceptor problem, he and his design team, the Skunk Works at Lockheed, went for simplicity, lightweight, and a very efficient design.
Kelly Johnson came up with the Starfighter, and we called it the High Fasty. The high, faster airplane would win the battle. And what would it do? Go high and fast. Once you did that, you better head back home because you're out of gas. And you better not try to turn real hard or you'll fall out of the sky. It took a big piece of airspace to make a 360-degree turn.
You'll notice that the wings on the F-104 are proportionally very small compared to the wings on other airplanes, and they are designed strictly for supersonic flight. That means you have to get them going really fast on the ground before you can even take off.
The F-104 went supersonic on its first flight. It was always fast. It carried very little fuel and had a great big engine and was very pointy. So it was easy to go fast. 104 was a basic airplane. When we were flying the thing out of Homestead in those early days, we didn't even have a navigation system. We just go out there until we sort of passed over a little set of islands that we knew. That was sort of where the line was between Cuban territory and the U.S. territory. That was about the most complex system that we had. We had sort of a super squadron at Homestead. We had 26 unit equipment airplanes, and we could scramble from wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to the sound of a horn, and it would go, and we would come awake, run out the door, run to our airplane, get in, start up, and be airborne in less than 3 minutes. I have gotten airborne and been going through 10,000 feet when I'm saying to myself, come on, Charlie, wake up, you're flying now. And that's the way you feel sometimes when you're scrambled in the dead of night. We scrambled on some very interesting things. Sometimes they had an idea of what it was or who it was, but most of the time is we get airborne and we're on the way out to take a look. And that happened the time that I intercepted a nuclear submarine. Nobody knew who it was.
Field of radar, which will search out unknown aircraft long before they reach U.S. borders.
But it was clearly a nuclear submarine on the surface. Was it friendly or not friendly? In this case, it turned out to be a British submarine coming into Cape Canaveral. The typical air defender says, when you make your intercept, get type and numbers and color. I'd say big, black, submarine, with 3 numbers. Submarine's not going very fast, and the slowest I can fly is 180 knots, which is pushing 200 miles an hour, going, and well, I'm gonna have to come back around again. I didn't quite get the numbers that time. But that's how you get to intercept a submarine.
F-104s gained a reputation as being widowmakers. They were dangerous to fly. They had a high accident rate compared to other airplanes, even other really high performance airplanes. The good news is, boy, is this airplane sexy. And the Air Force recognized that and used it a lot for their recruiting. They would show an F-104 doing aerobatics and steep climbs while an announcer read the poem by John Gillespie McGee Jr. called High Flight. This video inspired a whole generation of pilots who were maybe 6 to 10 years old when they saw this on TV.
As a young kid growing up, I saw High Flight before I got into the Air Force Academy. When they would say the poem, I was all set to go fly this thing. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and flown on laughter's silver wings.
Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through
that was my motivation. And the fact that I ended up getting to have a long tour in the Starfighter was just magic.
Hearing directly from these pilots, we can only begin to imagine the full experience of flying these remarkable machines. Being at high altitude at supersonic speeds and alone in the cockpit is something that most of us can only dream of, something that pilots can only describe as magic. Next, we'll hear from Charlie Johnson, who flew the Republic F-105 Thunderchief.
A pilot's tour of duty is 100 missions.
100 missions to be flown, 100 targets still unknown. But it's my belief that my Thunderchief strikes a telling blow to help G.I. Joe. Till 100 missions I myself have flown.
My name is Charlie Johnson, and I had the privilege of flying the F-105 1969, 70, 71, and 72. I have been a fan of airplanes all my life since I was 3 years old. I believe in motivation, and I've never been motivated to do anything other than be a fighter pilot. The 105, to me personally, is a machine you truly connect with. It was, in my estimation, the epitome of airplanes in its time. Carried more, did more, just a tremendous machine.
And this is the Republic F-105 Thunderchief.
At the same time that the other Century Series fighters are being developed by other manufacturers, Republic Aviation in New York is developing the F-105.
Screeching through the clouds at Mach Plus, these F-105 Thunderchiefs are bent on destroying the enemy's ground potential.
The F-105, although it's got an F for fighter designation, was really designed around the idea that it could carry a nuclear weapon internally and deliver it supersonically. Nevertheless, it became a superb air-to-air fighter, and it was mainly used for ground attack during the Vietnam War.
'105 development rumors started in 1951, started getting serious in 1958. Almost everybody that ever flew it in combat. You really start to identify with the power, the magic of the airplane. And when I went to pilot training, at that time, if you were first in your class, you could pick any airplane in the inventory. And the 105 was all I ever wanted to fly since I was in high school. So I had the good fortune of knowing a lot about the airplane, watching the development, watching it go into service, And then when I graduated from pilot training, being selected to go to F-105 training, have always felt that there was never a finer fighter built. One of the interesting things about flying fighters is that you have to be very competitive. And there is an attitude in fighter pilots, and it's kind of an invincibility almost. And you're pretty much convinced that if anything happens, it's never going to happen to you. If you walked into a room with 100 people getting ready to go out on a mission, and whatever you believe in stood up on the stage and said, 99 of you folks are not going to come back today, everybody would stand up in the room and walk out and say, it's really sad that all those other people aren't coming back today because I am. And there is always the element of risk. The people that are concerned about hurting themselves in a fighter don't last in a fighter. They generally will quit or wash out. It's driven by attitude. It is driven by incredible training. There's not an emergency or a system or a thing that can happen in that airplane that the pilot doesn't know about before you take off. So you're trained to handle whatever happens.
The two-seat F&G models were used in extremely dangerous missions called wild weasel missions, where they would go out and try to protect other American airplanes by attracting surface-to-air missiles. They would fly over and mimic an attacking force of American airplanes, get the North Vietnamese radar to lock onto them so that they could see where those radar sites were, and then they would attack them with anti-radiation missiles, anti-radar missiles. The problem with that is, by the time you find out where that radar is and lock your missiles onto it, they've launched missiles at you. And so it's extremely dangerous. You're purposely drawing their fire and getting them to shoot at you, and then hoping that you can get out of the way of those missiles that are already airborne, or get to the radar before they can launch the missiles.
They found the 105 was the absolute ideal airplane for that. They built an F model, which was 2 seats. They converted those to put all the electronics warfare equipment in the back. We equipped them with standard arms, which was a very, very lethal weapon. The Weasel's total job was to fly ahead and behind the strike force and to keep the missiles' heads down. Republic has always had an interesting design philosophy. It was overcoming weight with power. We literally had to refuel within 20 minutes of takeoff. We'd take off lightweight and then refuel, and then we'd refuel again going into the target. Most missions had at least 3 refuelings, 2 going in, 1 coming out. I had one where I was doing a search and rescue air cap that I had 11 refuelings. So they plug the boom down and give you some gas and you keep going. There's nothing I would love more than for somebody to fuel up on 105 and go jump in it right now. If I could go back and do anything in life, let me go fly one more 4-ship, let me go fly one more flight. So a lot of lessons were learned from the airplane. Evolutionary is the right word, because every piece of the airplane, the way that it works, the redundancy that you build into the airplane is all a result of losses in machines like the Century Series fighters. Each of the fighters that you see in each of the Century Series fighters have contributed tremendously to the fighting force that we have right now.
We look back at the 1950s and the Century Series as a time of enormous growth in aviation technology. Anything was possible, and development was happening at a lightning pace. We still see the legacy of the Century Series in the aerodynamic profiles of modern-day fighters. Avionics, automation, and intelligence make today's fighters safer, faster, and more effective than ever before. The Century Series was a part of that trajectory, but what the future holds, we will have to just wait and see. This program was made possible by Wings Over the Rockies, educating and inspiring all people about aviation and space endeavors of the past, present, and the future. Hi, I'm Sean Sederberg, and this is Behind the Wings. In this episode, we're exploring the Learjet legacy.
Okay, we finished the turn, now climbing straight away.
For nearly 60 years, the Learjet came to define a new class of luxury aircraft, the business jet.
No other business jet can fly that high.
Now, the final Learjet is being assembled at the Wichita-based production facility in the aviation capital of the world.
Learjet on a world record-setting flight.
From its record-setting performance achievements to its outsized role in popular culture, the Learjet's place in history is here to stay, long after the production lines have shut down. It's time to go behind the wings.
Bill Lear was an entrepreneur based in California. He wanted to build a small jet airplane. His board of directors at California said, no, we're not going to do that, so he resigned. He goes to Switzerland. His son, who was living in Switzerland at the time, said that there's a small fighter bomber called the P-16, which is being built here in Switzerland, which the Swiss are not going to buy. And Bill Jr. said, I think this could be the platform for a small jet airplane.
One day I got a letter from Switzerland and said, Don, if you want a job, I have one over here for you. You can be head of the technical group. Cessna at that time, I was very disappointed because we were building the first business jet over there. And Dwayne Wallace came in one morning and said, nobody can afford a business jet except the military. And the military aren't interested in what we're doing. So they came in and canceled the whole project. After that, I said, if anybody's going to build a business jet, that's where I'm going. I had a wife and 4 children at the time, and they stayed here, and I went to Switzerland. And when I got over there, I didn't like what was going on. I tried to talk to these people, and they didn't like the Americans coming in there. And so you'd walk in and they'd lay down on their desk and cover what they were doing so you couldn't see. I tried to supervise them, and those guys would sit there and they were reading magazines. And one day, one of the guys that could speak English, I said, why do you guys just not work in here? And he says, well, we make drawings in ink, you know, and we have to take time, and we make a line, and then we have to sit for a while and let that line dry. And, holy cow, we're never going to build this thing here. So Bill Lear finally said, okay. And so he went looking, and I told him, I said, if you come to Wichita, we know a lot of engineers, and it'll be easy to get them. Finally, he came to Wichita.
After the FFA P-16 Swiss fighter jet drew Bill Lear to Switzerland, he soon realized that Wichita, Kansas was the place that Learjet needed to be. The workforce of engineers was there and ready to go. With a big vision and a lot to prove, Learjet made the move to Wichita.
Wichita was founded in 1871, and for about the first 40 years was known primarily for agriculture, a little bit of meat processing, and small businesses. In the early 20th century, oil was discovered in this part of the state of Kansas, and several people made a lot of money pretty quickly toward the end of World War I. So the flyers got together with the oil people who had the money, who provided the resources to allow that to happen. And at one point in the 1920s, there were more than a dozen different aircraft manufacturing facilities in Wichita, Kansas. Another reason why Wichita is this center is we are very flat out here. So if your airplane had trouble, it was not a big deal to land the airplane as opposed to trying to find a mountain range to go through and then land. We have a large number of flying days, so that's important to have good weather when you're flying, particularly in an experimental airplane. And finally, we're basically in the middle of the U.S., so that delivering an airplane to either coast was not a big deal. So a lot of factors kind of coalesced to provide the genesis of Learjet, which in 1928 got the name of the air capital of the world because of the great number of small airplanes that were being built here.
The very first business jet, when everyone told him it can't be done and no one will buy them, and the perseverance, he stayed in it and kept it going. And then to build it to such an iconic brand is, I mean, overwhelming. How they did this, you know, in the times that they actually did it in. The technology, and the workforce, and the skills, and they developed that in Wichita, Kansas.
Bill Lear was a visionary and a jack of all trades. He was an inventor, an engineer, and an entrepreneur. According to those who knew him closely, working for him was an exercise in controlled chaos. Learjet moved quickly on its mission to create the world's first business jet.
Learjet showed up in the 60s, but in 1958, the Boeing 707 had just come out, so people were actually being ferried around the country on jet airliners, and Bill Lear came to Wichita, and he said to the combined Cessna and Beechcraft people, if you guys don't build a private airplane that's a jet airplane to compete with that 707, I will.
Bill Lear was clearly a visionary, the greatest visionary I've ever been around and spent much time with. He was everything that anybody has ever heard about. He was irascible, he could be a son of a gun, he could be warm, he could be kind, he could be funny, he could be generous. So he was all of those things all wrapped up. Somebody always asking me what was it like working for Bill Lear, and I said it was a number of years, the best years of my life that I wouldn't particularly want to go through again, because he would fire somebody on Tuesday and hire him back on Wednesday. So it was a lot of fun to be around. But he was just a guy who saw things before anybody else saw things, and he was ahead of his time.
Bill Lear was a genius. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He was 13 years old. He's pretty much on his own. He was an orphan very early, and he came up with an awful lot of stuff. He was a self-trained engineer. He had a lot of great ideas.
Bill Lear was an incredible visionary. He had a fire in his spirit. And, you know, people would tell him that these inventions were never going to happen and he couldn't do it. But Bill never gave up and he pushed those limits. One of his favorite quotes is, "They said it couldn't be done, and it was."
Engineering was his long suit. That's where he spent most of his time. Engineers talk about coming back to work in the morning and they might have this blueprint of they were working on, and he'd be drawing all over it, and you'd see a WPL signature on it where he told you what he wanted to change or asking you questions. And the engineer said, you know, if you thought about it, he was usually right. That he could just see their drawing and have an idea and improve it. So this was a guy with an 8th grade education. So a pretty amazing story in itself.
Well, Bill Lear was a very interesting guy. He was a real genius and a really interesting person to know. He had so many things on his mind all the time, and things he was interested in. Not one thing, but not even a dozen more.
To ride with Bill Lear in the airplane was an experience. Number one, he was type rated in the airplane at the age of 62. And if he was in the airplane, he was in the left seat. He flew. And if you were in the back, it was not unusual for him to back out of his seat in the left with a screwdriver in one hand and maybe a pair of pliers, dragging cable down the center aisle where the other people were, tinkering with something. It never amounted to a problem, but it was a little bit disconcerting if it was your first ride in a Learjet.
Bill Lear came in at 5 o'clock one day and said, "We're going to fly the airplane tonight." And holy cow, the airplane was ready to fly because we had taken it out and taxied it, but we didn't have a lot of the systems in it yet. I remember one of the guys that was going to fly says, "We need parachutes," and we didn't have any, and Bill Lear said, "Well, what do you need a parachute for? You bring that airplane back here. I don't want you jumping out of it."
They said, "It's ready." Hank and I climbed in, taxied out to runway 14, fueled it up, and I took it off, got it up a few thousand feet and started wiggling it around a little bit. We come back around to land. Cars were lined up all along K-42 with their lights on.
All our skeptics were out there.
Yeah, the word got around, I guess it said on the radio that the Learjet is flying. One of the best sights I've ever seen.
Got my video camera and took a shot of it taking off and landing, and those videos are still around today. You know, they made the first flight, everything worked fine, the gear came up and went down. It was a great day. Landed without incident. And I remember Bill was so excited, the next day he says, we've got to get this airplane painted and we're going to have a big press conference. So some of those you see, those flights you see now, I took off that little 8mm camera, flew right over the top of the building here.
Learjets set a standard right away. I mean, literally, if you were to look at the movie of the first flight of the Learjet flying over the factory, they made a low pass. And it was so fast it was almost hard to follow the airplane. And it maintained a tremendous record for capability, set speed records, set altitude records.
As the first Learjets took flight, the brand name and its role in popular culture were quick to follow. From high-profile celebrities to Hollywood movie appearances, Learjet had an unconventional yet highly effective strategy to make the Learjet name synonymous with the term business jet. Surprisingly, it worked.
Very definitely, Bill Lear's vision was to have the name Learjet become synonymous with the term business jet. That was the charge to his public relations people, of which I was one.
The Lear company really worked hard to roll it out, and it became a household name. When an airplane was flying over, people would say, oh, there goes the Learjet.
It really caught on. People would see any private jet flying, they say, oh, look, there goes a Learjet.
They think of a Learjet.
Everybody knew the Learjet, even if they weren't in aviation. Being out in the Hollywood area, Bill said to me one day, look, he said, I want to take this company public one day. He said, I want all the publicity we can get. He says, take the phone book and anybody in Hollywood you want to fly, just fly them.
I had the privilege of flying a Lear 24 with Arnold Palmer. Well, Arnold Palmer is a tremendous athlete, natural athlete, tremendous pilot, tremendous person, and the Learjet fit his personality. Go someplace fast and enjoy life.
Elvis Presley flew in one on his honeymoon. The Byrds, a musical group, had written a song about the Learjet. Carly Simon talked about the Learjet. Frank Sinatra had one.
With Frank and his friends came Dean Martin, Sammy Davis, Peter Lawford, and things. And so I flew them around a lot early when the Lear was a new airplane. They loved it, and they helped promote the airplane.
Learjet wasn't just making waves in pop culture. It also set a host of performance records. From time to climb to speed and high altitude records, Learjet used its fighter jet roots to push the limits of performance. Many of these records still hold today.
Early on, the Learjet got the nickname of the businessman's jet just because of its high performance, flying from sea level to 40,000 feet in 7 or 8 minutes, which is Air Force fighter performance. Its speed of 560 miles an hour. It's an airplane that looks like it's flying 500 miles an hour standing on the ramp. Just the sleek design of the airplane.
I was always trying to stay ahead of the competition, trying to be at the fastest, the highest, lowest operating cost, time to climb records, distance records, speed records, which the airplane is, within its envelope, was capable of doing.
It was the best airplane because they had the most performance, the most speed, ability to climb. And a friend of mine, Jack Conroy, we were talking, and I said, why don't we fly to New York back in Lear? And so we did. It went off really nice. We took his kids along. Flew from Los Angeles to Wichita and refueled. Bill Lear was there and his wife, Moya. And we flew to New York and had lunch with Jack Dempsey. And then we flew to Tulsa and refueled and back to Los Angeles. It set a record. It still stands, by the way, for that size aircraft. 10 hours and 52 minutes. We got there well before sunset. Jack's boys had baseball games that night, little league baseball. And we got back in time for them to make their games at 6 o'clock. Little Lear was just a great airplane. It'd do anything you wanted to do. So it was a great day.
Learjet was certainly an innovator when it came to creating the business jet as a new class of aircraft. However, they also innovated on many other features that helped improve the plane's performance. You may have seen those little tips on the end of wings. They're called winglets, and Learjet was one of the first to experiment with them. Now we'll hear from Camille Calabeo to learn more about winglets and exactly how they work.
How do winglets work? Some airplanes have wingtips that stick up at an angle. These are called winglets, and they do a lot of work to ensure airplane flight is as efficient as possible. Learjet was one of the first manufacturers to experiment with winglets on their production airplanes. As an airplane flies, the air under the wings is at a higher pressure than the air on top of the wings. This is what generates the lift that keeps the plane in the air. But at the tips of the wings, the high pressure air from the bottom bleeds upward into the low pressure air on the top. This actually creates mild tornadoes of swirling air behind the wings that cause a lot of drag. Overcoming drag takes a lot of energy, which means it takes a lot of jet fuel. So we want to decrease drag as much as possible. Winglets help us do this. They decrease the size of those little tornadoes behind the wings, thus decreasing drag and the amount of fuel needed. But why is this important? First, jet fuel is very expensive, so the more fuel a plane needs, the more expensive an airline ticket could be. Winglets reduce fuel consumption by approximately 4 to 5% per plane per year. This might not seem like a lot, but winglets on a Boeing 767, for example, reduce fuel consumption by over 500,000 gallons per plane per year. They also dramatically reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So for a Boeing 767, this equates to reducing carbon dioxide emissions by nearly 5,000 metric tons for each plane every year.
As far as designing and building aircraft, I think we were years ahead of a lot of our competition. You know, our technology was there. We, constantly invested in the future, tried to stay up with the changing times.
We had an advanced design department that was always looking at the scene outside. You know, there's a market niche here, a market niche there, and do we want to go after that? And if we want to go after it, can we get in one of our airplanes to fit that? And that's how the evolution would take place. You'd find a need, and you'd go fill that need, and try and do it better than the competition.
As Learjet established this new class of airplane, the business jet, competing aviation companies including Cessna and Beechcraft took note. For all of Bill Lear's genius, Learjet was a relatively small company and low on cash. Changing consumer preferences towards larger jets and an increase in competition would prove to be another challenge for Learjet. With the newly established market and a new demand for business jets, the competition came, and it came fast.
As Learjet was emerging, there were 3 or 4 other aircraft being developed about that same time. So there was this race to be first, race to be the most, be the best. Because of the synergy of these various corporate jet models, at a time when the propeller airplanes were flying 150, 250 miles an hour, the corporate jets just plain took over. And this is now basically a corporate jet industry. There are still propeller airplanes flying, and they do a very good job, but the glamour, the pizzazz of business aviation remains in the corporate jet, and Learjet has to be in the forefront of that. It was the first, it was the most glamorous, it was the most talked about, and sort of set the pace, I think, for the industry to follow. Others have done a lot of great work. In the meantime, Cessna has delivered more corporate jets than anybody else, and they're all made right here in Wichita as well. But Learjet, I think people would give it the consensus was sort of the trendsetter.
The Learjet factory here was delivering about, right before the downturn, about almost 70 Learjets a year. After the downturn, that fell, and then there were some other things going on at that time. A lot of competitors came into that space, and there was a lean toward the mid-size and the larger jets. With Learjet and Bill Lear, they quickly ran out of money, so they sold to Gates, and then they sold to an investment firm, and then Bombardier bought them in 1990, kind of out of financial distress.
Learjet was obviously purchased buy Bombardier. It was something of a distressed product at that point. Bombardier made a good purchase, and they ran the company through the 90s in a pretty aggressive fashion, lots of R&D money invested and so on. But in later years, two things happened. Bombardier expanded the airplane products they had. We had the Learjets, and then they had the Challenger line, and then they started adding a stretch Challenger that they called the CRJ. That particular model took off, and they built hundreds of those airplanes for all sorts of airlines. Regional airliners, and for that matter, major airlines, buy their airplanes in fleets. So you had production that was stretching out years. I think it spread the situation at Bombardier so thin that they had to start looking at ways to consolidate.
It's been a struggle for almost 60 years, and it looks like the end is about to come here in 2021, and it's too bad because it is the end of an era. The industry will go on, it will continue to thrive and succeed, but without the Learjet brand as emerging as one of the preeminent airplanes being produced and delivered.
It makes me really sad. It seemed like everybody that owned the place, they were always seemed like a short on cash, you know. So you struggled. I saw such a great future for this company.
Sad for us to learn this year that Bombardier had made the decision not to continue to make Learjets. They still have a few on the assembly line right now, and they'll continue deliveries through the end of this year, 2021. But Bombardier made a decision internally that they just weren't selling enough of them to keep the production line going, and they are really focusing on the larger airplanes where they make a lot more money and so forth. I suppose it could be resurrected at some point. We're sad to see it, but there's still thousands of Learjets out there in the world that are flying and serving their customers every single day. They have been used extensively in air ambulance transport. And that particular airplane that we had and operated for a number of years that sits in front of wings now was used early on in the air ambulance business to carry people who had a serious injury or had a life-threatening type of illness and needed to get to Denver, Colorado, maybe from an outlying place to get higher level of care. They still prove to be a very viable airplane even in today's world with the economics that we all face. 40 and 50 years old that are still flying every single day.
The Learjet legacy will always live on and retain its name as the cachet of the world's first private business jet.
It set the standard for performance, for speed. That very first little seed that Learjet planted has grown into all the business jets in the world right now. Learjet is the granddaddy of all of them, and it's just a tremendous performing, wonderful little airplane.
The production side is going away, but Learjet isn't going away.
The support of our service center to bring aircraft back in. Our operators absolutely love the plane, so bring them back in, refurb them.
The team is very engaged, and they're all in. They're, they want to, kick all the way to the end and build the last unit.
Even though they will stop making Learjets brand new at the end of this year, I think will continue on for many, many years. That Learjet name and Learjet legacy that Bill Lear started back in the 1960s is still felt by all of us today.
An icon of the industry, a pace setter in the industry. It created a whole segment of the marketplace.
I can't imagine my life without the Learjet. Important time of my life, learning the business, learning how to conduct myself as a professional, and to be at the center of the business jet industry with the leader of the business jet industry, it was just almost too much to hope for, and we had a great time doing it.
Even after the last Learjet rolls off the assembly line, the airplanes and their impact on aviation remain. From Bill Lear's vision to create the first business jet, to its rise in popular culture and record-setting performance achievements, Learjet forever shaped the landscape of modern-day aviation. Learjet production may be shutting down, but its name and its legacy are here to stay.